Hey everyone, it's Tutorial Tuesday, and this week I want to show you guys how to make the floor tile family signs. Some people do home, some people do family, some people do a last name. I prefer home, and some people do an established date on there. I usually don't, but it's all preference. But I just want to show you guys how I do it today. So the first thing that I like to do before anything is I measure my tile exactly. I'm using my Cricut measuring tape. I like this because it's nice and long. So my tile is a little over 23.5 inches, and we know in Design Space the largest you can cut widthwise is 23.5 inches, so I'm going to keep that in mind. And then it's about 5 3/4 inches tall. And I measure that so that I can put an exact shape in Design Space to use as my template. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean my tile with some alcohol. I just use isopropyl rubbing alcohol, and I clean it really well. So I'm going to do that and then we'll come back. Now normally I will clean, if I'm doing a mug or something, I will wash that off while my vinyl's cutting. But for these tiles, I feel like they do tend to take a little bit longer to dry, so I like to wipe them off before I begin my project so that they really have time to dry. My tile's not too dirty today, but normally when I do these, I do get quite a bit of dirt off of it. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over to the side to let it dry. I'm going to wipe up my spill. And I'm going to go ahead and let that dry. And I'm going to grab my computer here. And for those of you who have not watched my videos before, if you have a hard time seeing the mouse, just look for this. That's where my mouse will be. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go down here to the bottom left corner of my screen, and I'm going to zoom out to 50% for now. I may zoom further out, we'll have to see. Next I'm going to go up and I'm going to select shapes, and I'm going to pick a square. I like to unlock my dimensions up here, so I'm going to do that. For a width, I'm going to put in 23.5 because that is the biggest we can go widthwise. And for the height, I'm going to do 5 3/4. And since it was a little under, I'm just going to press it down. 5.73, just to make sure that we're not making our design too big. Now that I have my size, what I like to do is usually go over here to my layers panel and make the color just a little bit lighter. It's easier to work with. I'm still going to use gray because that's what I like to work with. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go over to my text and I'm going to type in, I like to do home, and I do it in all capitals. That's what I like to do on the basis of my sign. I come from a family where not everyone has the same last name, so to not exclude anyone, I like doing home. You could do a last name, you can choose to do family, it's really all preference. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this. I like to use the Algerian font. I believe it's a system font, so you shouldn't have any trouble finding it. I am using a Windows, so if you have a Mac and you can't find it, that is possibly why. And now while that goes ahead and switches over, I'm going to just adjust it. I'm going to go ahead and move this down a little so that our text editing toolbar isn't in the way. And I like to just play around with it until I'm happy with the size. I don't want it to be too big. I'm going to put names over it, so that looks good. Now, since these are the only two things on the screen, I'm going to go up here to our Select All tool, and then I'm going to use the Align tool, and I'm going to center horizontally, and I'm going to center vertically. And that is so I know that it's placed exactly in the center. So now there are two options that we can do here. Some people like to do what's called the knockout method, and some people like to just layer on top of it. I layer on top of it. I usually do not do the knockout method, but I will show you quickly how to do the knockout method, and then I will do how I like to do it, where I layer it. So to make this easier, I'm going to drag my mouse around these. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to hide a layer over here. And we'll come back to that one. Oops. Oh, you know what? Let me select both. I'm going to group it so that it's easier to hide it. I'm going to select the eye and do that. Okay, now most people like to do the MF I Love Glitter font, so that's what we will do today. And I will go ahead and also leave a little key in the comments so that you guys can see how to use the I Love Glitter font. So now I'm going to be making something for my sister-in-law and brother-in-law. So I'm going to write their names, and it might be a little hard for you guys to see. So I'm going to zoom in for this part just so you guys can see this. Okay, now we don't have the I Love Glitter font yet selected. So what we're going to do is we're going to use, it's the straight button on your keyboard. It's with the backslash. Sometimes it looks like 2 dashes. Mine is right above my enter key. So we're going to select that, and I'm going to type in their names, and then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to select the I Love Glitter font. And you'll see that it's going to, that straight line is going to change to the heart with the tails. And then to add the tails to the beginning and ends of the name, we're going to be using brackets. Let me see. I'm going to show you guys quickly on my keyboard. This right here, this line is what you want for the center with the heart and the flourishes. And then right here and right here are what you're using for the tails, depending if you want it on the beginning or the end, depends on which bracket you'll choose. So I'm going to bring you guys back up here. My computer's being a little funny today, so we're going to go back and select the font, and now we're all set. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add the brackets. So you guys can see this, how it's working. So I'm going to zoom you back out. And then what you'll do here is I'm going to make this bigger so you guys can see it. What you're going to do is just go up here to your letter spacing on your text edit toolbar and just bring this all together. I always use the letter spacing, decrease that first before I ungroup or do anything. Now, because we are going to weld this together because it is a cursive font, the first thing I'm going to do is go up here to the top right of my layers panel and duplicate it. I'm going to hide this before I make any further adjustments or edits. That way it's easier in case I ever have any issues and want to edit. So I'm going to ungroup it, and I'm just going to, I can see here, I'm going to move this a little. I can see that the E's pretty close, so I'm going to select both of them by using the control key on my keyboard, and I can see this tail here, the E and the T. I'm having trouble selecting that T since it's so close together. Or that E. So we're going to go ahead and do it in our layers panel. We're going to push this a little bit closer, and now we'll pick up that second T and we'll move this whole piece closer. This to me just is so much easier than playing around with everything. So I'm going to go ahead and select it all. I'm going to go down to the bottom of my layers panel and hit weld. Now, if you were to do the knockout method, here's what you're going to do. You're going to hide. You don't have to hide these pieces. I think it just makes it easier. We are going to go up. Oh, sorry. We're going to change this here in our layers panel to print. And we're going to hit make it. I have to turn my machine on. Oh, that's right. It's set, I forgot, print and cut limitations. So I'm just going to make it really teeny tiny small so that we can override the we don't have the print and cut limitation. Okay, now that we shrunk it down so that we don't have to worry about the print and cut size limitations, we're going to go up here and click make it. And then you're going to see our thing here with the registration marks for print and cut, and we're going to hit continue. And now we're going to go send to printer. And you're going to see how it looks here all fuzzy. That's our bleed, that's what we want. And you're going to select right on here, and you're going to right click and save image as. I just am using their name so it's easier to find, and I can see that it's under my download, so it will be easy to find. And then I'm going to click out of here. I can cancel my cut and go back to my main screen. So what I'm going to do here is go to my upload button over here on the side. I'm going to go to upload image, and I'm going to browse. I'm going to make sure that I'm in downloads, and I'm going to type in my file name. I'm going to click complex. I always do that just to make sure I get the cleanest lines. And because this is so small, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to erase the background here. And I'm going to erase my registration marks on all areas. You're going to use this little wand up here too in the upper left hand corner. That's how you do it. Or you can go ahead and use the eraser tool next to it. It's up to you guys. Sometimes I can see like over at the corners, it looks like I'm missing a few pieces there. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab my eraser tool now that I'm done and get those few little dots there that I missed. And then I'm going to go back to my eraser tool, and I'm going to make sure I delete all of the background. I'm going to click continue, and I'm going to save it as a cut image. That's very important to make sure. I'm going to, usually I do a ton of tags for my files when I save them, but for this, we don't really need to. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. And now since we're working on that project, I'm going to hit upload. I'm going to insert images. And the first thing I'm going to do is obviously make it bigger. I'm going to go up to rotate, and I'm going to do 270, which will bring it the way I need it because of the way my rotation was. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this, select my original, and do it back to cut. That way we're heading where we need to go. Okay, so I'm going to make this bigger, and I'm going to make this a different color just for the purpose of being able to see it easily. So I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to make this bigger. Now I made it 17.6 inches wide. So my original, I want a little smaller, which it is. So that's great. I'm going to go up here to arrange and move my original to the front. And I'm just going to play around with this until it fits about evenly. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm going to go back over to my layers panel, and I'm going to unhide my original pieces for this one, not the one that we grouped to hide, but the original for this. And I'm going to select both of these pieces here and move them up where I want them. So what I'm going to do is take this pink piece here, and I usually find it's easier when you have a lot of pieces going on and they're kind of overlapping on your canvas. I find it easier to select it from my layers panel. While holding the control key on my keyboard, I'm going to select home. Oops, that's part of my group. I'm going to go down and select my word home, and I'm going to slice them. You can only slice 2 layers at a time, so if you're finding any problem slicing, remember you can only slice 2 layers at a time. So I'm going to remove all of these pieces here. We don't need any of it. And I'm going to put my home back. Now, sometimes you'll notice like how you have this little bit of the piece of the E here and the little of the H. You can line it up better than what I did. Usually I do, but today for the purpose of this, I just wanted to show you guys how to do this method. And then I will go ahead and I will select my original wording. I'm going to change it to white. That's how I would do it. And then that's how you do the knockout method. So you can go ahead, cut them, and just layer them together right on your tile. Now I am going to, I'm going to select this, and I'm going to group it and I'm going to hide it, and we'll go back to our original that I grouped to hide here, and I'm going to ungroup it just so I can work with it. Okay, now for how I would do it, I just layer it right on top of each other. So I'm going to type out their names, and I like to use Samantha Upright. It is paid font, so if it's something that you want to use too, you'll have to pay for it. But I like to use the Samantha font, and there's extra glyphs and stuff that you can add in if you don't like these fonts. But I do like to use the I Love Glitter flourishes when connecting the names and on the ends of the names. I think that they're really, really pretty, so I do like to do that. So once this switches over to Samantha for the names, I'll go ahead and I'll just type in those little pieces that I showed you guys earlier. Make this a little bigger, and then I'm just going to go over to select my text, and I'm just going to type in the keys that we need, the key codes that we need for the I Love Glitter font, and I'm going to change this back to I Love Glitter, and it will just leave me those pieces. Now I like to do it this way because I can size it and I know everything's going to be sized up the same, and then I can ungroup this and play around with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this one and hide it before I make any edits. And then I'm going to use my letter spacing to get these closer together. Now I'm going to do this way while the names are still in the same text box, because for me, I just think it makes it easier when sizing everything, because I know it's still the same and I don't really have to worry about it. I'm going to move these up a little bit, so I can move this up a little bit. Now if I make this bigger, it's easier to see how these aren't really connected, so I'm going to go ahead now and ungroup, and then I'll move these little pieces here together. I don't really like when the T's touch, so I'm going really carefully. Okay, that's all edited. And then I'm going to select each individual name and weld it. I'm not going to get all fancy with the Samantha font right now, so that takes a little more time. And then I'll go ahead and I'll do this. And I'm going to select this box here, and I'm going to bring everything up. Now I want it to be all even, so I'm going to start matching this one, this part of the heart right here, to the S, and then I like to just get a good base point. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change the color of our I Love Glitter font just so we can see how everything is looking. I'm going to ungroup it, and I'm going to move this flourish over, and I'll move this heart back. Now this is just so I can make sure everything's going to look nice and even and lined up without really having to do too much extra work lining it up. I really like to make it this way. That way it's kind of already lined up for you. Now I'm going to select this. I have this flourish is already selected, so I'm going to select the name, and I'm going to move them both together. And now you can go ahead and select this whole piece here and then duplicate it and hide it before we weld it. That way if you weld it all together and you don't like the way it looks where the flourishes are placed once it's all welded, that didn't take the whole piece for me. Okay, so I'm going to again make sure all pieces are selected. I'm going to go ahead and group it, and then I'll hide it. There we go. Now I'll select all of these pieces and weld it, and then you just want to go ahead and look at it and see if you like the way it looks. So as long as you do, you're good. Now I'm going to go ahead and select it and change it to white. It's easier to see once we put it up here, and I'm going to just size it down, and I'm going to be really careful to make sure that when I'm sizing it down, I'm keeping it within, this is 17.2 inches wide, so we're still good in terms of how long we can cut, but always keep an eye on how you're doing it. So I'm going to select all 3 of these now, and I'm going to do my align. I'm going to center both horizontally and vertically, and then I'll play around with it. Now this is where the center points are. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. I like when the flourishes go a little further past the H and the E. But I like to align it so it gets me a good base point of where I'm at. And then I can go ahead and just select home. And I'm going to align and center it horizontally, vertically, and see where I'm at. All right, so this flourish, I can see, I want it to stand out a little more, so I'm just going to play around with it. So you can just go ahead and play around with it until you like the look of it. Now, what I like to do for the, I keep this rectangle here that's the size of our tile because I like to cut a piece of felt on it and add it to the back because it is a floor tile. So if somebody ends up hanging it on their wall, or if you do a plate stand, I like that it just doesn't, you don't have to worry about it scratching or anything, especially when I give it as a gift. So I keep that here and I cut the felt with my maker. So I do leave that on, and then I just go through under the make it screen. I'll show you guys quickly how you can choose different things. This is just letting me know that I'm going to need a larger mat, and I'll press continue. I'm going to select my maker and I'll set my material. I believe I have felt. I'll have to double check it. So what I would do first is set my material to felt. Yep, I have some here. It's one of my favorites, and it's telling me to load the fine point blade, but I prefer to use the rotary blade. So I'm going to go over to edit tools and choose the rotary blade and press continue. So then I can go ahead and cut that. And after that cuts, it will bring me to my second mat here. And then I can go up here and I can edit it because I'm just going to cut vinyl, and that will do it. Actually, I think it will change it. See, it changes it for all your mats. So you have to change it after you make your first cut. And then I could keep the same things for my third mat. And then we'll just go ahead and layer it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to design my whole file, and I'm going to cut it, and I'll come back after that. Okay, I am back now that I have done my cutting and weeding. I am going to start by putting my black home layer down. You should always do your first layer first. If you did the knockout method, you could put them on the same piece of transfer tape and do it all at once. You can do it in steps. It's up to you. I love to work on my Cricut self-healing mat. What I like the most is it has the grid lines, so it makes it really easy for me to line everything up really nicely. So I'm going to pull my transfer tape back, and I'm going to transfer my first piece to my transfer tape, and then we're going to apply it. Now I used my Cricut True Control knife blade to cut my vinyl layers down after I cut them. I like to usually, it depends on what I'm cutting, but if I'm cutting something bigger, and I cut my vinyl after I cut my excess pieces off afterwards so that I can save as much vinyl as I can. But by cutting with the Cricut True Control knife blade, I get a perfectly straight edge so that when I go to line it up with my transfer tape, which I've also cut, which I haven't cut, it's still just the 12-inch piece, I know that I can line the tops up perfectly and it's straight. So when I go to apply it to my object, it is going to be straight already that way. I can see that I've used this transfer tape before, so I carefully pull it back to make sure everything transferred over to the transfer tape. Sometimes when I've used it a few times before, it takes a little more burnishing than usual, but worked perfectly. Now, what I like the most about using my self-healing mat for the guides is that I can take a look at my my computer, and I can see that my overall cut for this word was about 18.2 inches, and I know that my tile measured in at about 23.5 inches. So each piece that I want to get it even, so I'm going to start at about a little over 2.5 inches in, and that's going to help me line it up easier. I like to do it that way. I think that it's easier than trying to eyeball it. You can use any other form of measurement that you'd like, but for me, I like this. And then for the top and the bottom, I'm just going to eyeball that. I'm going to pull my transfer tape back a little. Now, some people have said that when using the tiles, they warm their tile up a little bit first with a hair dryer to get it warm so the vinyl transfers over a little easier, but I've never had an issue with it needing to be done that way. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to slowly and carefully burnish this one on. And I really like to just go slow up and down and then left to right. And to avoid bubbles, you'll want to make sure that you're burnishing really, really well. I usually find with a tile I don't have too many bubbles. I feel bubbles, I really only find bubbles on glass, but you just want to go slow to make sure. Now sometimes when you've got, because I use the Algerian font, it has those pointy corners, so sometimes that might come up with your transfer tape, and that's why I like to go slow when I pull it back. I pull it back at an angle, and if I do find that a corner is coming up, I just push the corner, or see this little piece right here, I can just push it back down with my finger, and it's really not an issue. See right here, it's coming up, so I'm just going to kind of set it back down, push it with my finger, and I'm going to keep going. Now on the thinner lines, see, I'm just going to hold it down and keep going. It really, it's really important with this to make sure that you are going slow, especially with the thinner lines. Now I can see it's kind of pulling up these corners here, so I can just hold onto one of the thicker pieces and do it, or I can go here and start, since this is the corner, and I can kind of hold it down as I'm going. This is a pretty smooth tile, so the surface is pretty smooth, but it's not perfect, so I'm going to, it does have a little bit of texture to it, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pull this up. And for the vinyl like this, when I do that, I just like to kind of let it naturally flow so that I don't wrinkle the vinyl or anything like that. So we're going to just slowly pull that, pull that back down. I'll fix that after so we don't keep pulling it up. And you're just really going to take your time, and you can even take your scraper. I don't want to do it too much because I'm bouncing you guys around, but you can take your scraper and push it back down and kind of keep going while you're at it. And then you're just going to keep working at it until it's all done. And then we'll put our second layer down. Now, you have the option where you can do registration marks if you'd like, to help make lining it up easier. But usually I don't use registration marks. I just kind of eyeball it. I like to use the measurements to make sure that I'm keeping it straight. So if you want to use like a yardstick or a different type of ruler to keep things lined up and straight, you can do that. But for me, I find that I just prefer to not use registration marks on stuff like this. I as long as it's straight. It's not, I don't need to layer it perfectly. If you used the knockout method, it's pretty easy to line that back up because you have that shadow layer that you took out there. So it is pretty easy to line up afterwards. So that's not too much of a concern with the knockout method. And with this method, you're just laying it on top. So really, no one's going to know what your true intent was, how your actual design looked on your computer versus how it comes now when you've laid it out. I like to look for points on my design. I'll show you my design after I get this down. I like to look for points that will kind of line up, that I can use as a guide instead of the registration marks. I think that that is, in my opinion, easier for me. So I'll show you my design, my final design on my computer screen once I get this layer down, and I'll show you the points that I will focus on, what I think will be easiest for me. And then we'll go ahead and do my names. I added my niece and nephew to it, so you'll notice as that my design is a little bit different than what you last saw, but I didn't, you guys, we went over enough of the letter spacing and welding that I didn't want to hold you guys up with all of that. It's easier, you know, to just do that off camera and come back and show you the final piece of everything. Okay, so now I'm going to, I'll burnish my second piece down. And I really like using just a full sheet of the Cricut transfer tape because I know that it's going to be the perfect length. I don't have to worry about any of that. And again, I cut this down with my True Control knife blade so I can line the tops of each up and make sure that the top is straight. I'm just gonna lay it down here and I'm just going to burnish it. Now we have some smaller, thinner lines here, so you're going to be really careful when burnishing and with application. So I'm going to, usually I burnish from the back too, especially when I'm doing something that does have thinner lines or it's a little more intricate. The font on that was a little better, so it really didn't require me to burnish from the back. It came up pretty easily from the front. But sometimes when your design's a little more intricate or detailed, you do have to burnish from the back. And then when you do that, I like to pull my paper from the vinyl. I find that it comes up easier. Now I use my fingernail to scratch it back down if I notice a piece is coming up. You can use your scraper or whatever you want to use, but my fingernails are long enough where usually that works for me. So sometimes I'll start at the other end too if some pieces aren't coming up as easily. And then like I said, I've used this transfer tape before and I noticed over here on this side it was a little more used and worn in, so it's not coming up as easily. So I'll go ahead and start on this side, and sometimes when you go from a different direction it will all start to come up a little easier. You can pull from the bottom, you can pull from side to side. It's up to you. I'm just gonna get this off. Thicker piece, so I'm going to watch that. All right. Now we're going to, sometimes you can just kind of pull it off with your fingernail. I've done that before, just carefully, very carefully. I think I've just got one little piece here that's holding me up. All right, let's throw that aside. Now I'm going to show you my design on my computer quickly so that we can see the points we're going to use to line it up. Okay, now it's a little hard to see, so I'm going to go ahead and find my back, bring it up. Okay, it's a little bit better. So you can see, I can see that this B here, let me go in a little. This B here matches up pretty closely with the left top of the M, and I can see that the L here fits pretty much into the side of the H, and then down here the N lines up pretty evenly with the E. So I'm going to go ahead and use those as some of my points, and I like to pick points on top and bottom and left and right side. That way we can go ahead and make sure that you're getting it even and straight. I can use my guides too. And before you lay it down, double check if you have any bubbles. I saw a little wrinkle in that E, and you want to push any of that down before you add your second layer on, because it's going to be much harder to get bubbled out when you if you don't do it in your first layer before adding your second layer. When you have too many layers, it's harder to get it out. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to match this N up in the left right corner over here, and I'm going to do it carefully because this vinyl is definitely going to stick to my other vinyl much easier. I'm going to line that L up, line that B up, and everything looks really good to me. Maybe it's not perfectly straight. I'm going to line up the top of my transfer tape with the top of my word here. I know that the word is straight across the top, and I know that my transfer tape is straight across the top. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to just move it over a little here. I'm going to make sure that this L here is lined up on that H the way I want it to. And then I'm going to line the top of my transfer tape up with the top of my word home. And then I can lay it all down. That looks pretty good to me. And I'm going to, again, burnish it really well. So I'm going to burnish it, and then I'm going to come back and show you guys our final piece. That way I don't keep bouncing you around on my table. Okay, now that I've got that all on, I like to just go over with my finger and just really push it down. It's not, some of the white vinyl too is also going to be on your tile. And again, that's not a completely smooth surface. It's pretty smooth, but it does have a little texture to it. So I like to just go ahead with my finger and make sure that all of the pieces are down. And you let it cure for 72 hours. It's, you know, it's stuck on there really well. But I like to go ahead and just push it down, and I don't use my scraper because I don't want to scratch the vinyl, and I like using my finger because that tells me I can really feel if there's any bumps or anything like that, but I don't have any, so we can go ahead and we can see our final piece here. And I'll go ahead and cut my felt later, and usually I just hot glue it on the back. You can use whatever kind of glue, you can use whatever kind of backing you'd like. I've seen people use cork. It's really all preference. I have a lot of felt on hand, so that's why I like to use it. But that's how you make a floor tile sign.